So, who wrote Shakespeare? Fucking Shakespeare! Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. Isn't that a fucking novel idea? Holy shit. Okay. So this question of blank actually wrote all of Shakespeare's plays and Shakespeare was illiterate. This keeps coming up for some reason because, you know, in the same way that people say, like, oh, the moon landing was fake, they just filmed it on their phones, because I have a phone, and so I cannot conceive of a time frame in history wherein people didn't have phones. Like, they can't actually put their mind around the fact that things were different before they were alive. So, like, let's just break down why this idea that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare is fucking retarded from the basic, you know, common sense angle. First of all, Shakespeare was employed by a theater troupe. He worked at a theater with a group of actors. That's when he wrote his plays. He didn't write his plays just for the fuck of it. He was paid to write plays for the theater that he worked for. That's why his will doesn't account for his plays, because he didn't own the plays. The theaters that he worked for own the plays. Just like how Walt Disney didn't own Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, the theaters that he animated the cartoons for owned Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. That's a whole other story, by the way. Also really interesting. Way more interesting than this, actually. But, The suggestion that anyone else but Shakespeare could have written Shakespeare's plays is frankly ludicrous, because his plays were written with specific actors in mind. He knew the people who would be performing his plays. He worked with them and knew their strengths and weaknesses as actors intimately, and knew, okay, Billy's gonna be playing fucking Hamlet. Jacob's gonna be playing fucking Rosencrantz. Like, Deborah's gonna play Ophelia, because I know that Deborah can play a good crazy bitch. Right? So, he knew who the person, like, in his mind's eye, he could envision the person that he knew performing the lines that he had wrote. He had their, you know, abilities and limitations as actors in mind. And the roles that he wrote changed depending on who was part of the King's Men Theatre Company at the time that he was employed and was writing the plays for them. They moved locations, they changed production, they changed actors, people kind of came and went. Shakespeare himself only worked for them for about a decade or less. So the idea that anyone else could have written Shakespeare's plays is fucking stupid, because no one else worked at the fucking theater group that Shakespeare was part of. The idea that, like, oh, some black chick from Italy wrote all of Shakespeare's plays, and they just happened to coincide with the exact strengths and weaknesses of the acting abilities of the performers at the King's Men Theatre Company. What an amazing coincidence that all these actors just so happened to get these plays and were like, oh, hey, I can perform this character, I can perform that character. We have the budgetary necessities to perform these sequences as they are written. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? And this idea that, you know, like, it actually makes a certain bit of sense to suggest that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare when you're saying the Earl of Oxford did it, because that's where it started, and I'll get to that. But this idea that, oh, the black Italian lady, she really wrote Shakespeare, is fucking stupid, because the idea of Shakespeare not writing Shakespeare because he was illiterate is that he was a commoner. He wasn't of noble birth. And the picture that people are showing of this Borealis chick, or whatever, that's a whole other can of beans. People are taking a completely unrelated picture. Like, the person that they're saying wrote Shakespeare actually existed, but she wasn't black. They're taking this picture of a completely unrelated person and attributing it to this person's name. Like, the person that they're talking about was Italian. She was an Italian ethnicity, and the picture is of a completely different person. So, just, like, the original idea is that he's a commoner, and the aristocracy wasn't comfortable with the idea of a commoner of low birth, just, you know, some middle-aged fucking William from the block, is responsible for writing these plays that are ubiquitous to British culture and, you know, like, the history of art in general. So they're like, a fucking poor-ass, uneducated plebeian couldn't have written them. It must have been someone who was educated and, you know, was worldly, because God forbid someone write about something that they have no personal first-hand experience or education with. That's never happened before. So, like, this newest thing is just the latest in a long, like, anti-Stratfordians is something that's been around for fucking ever. Like, and a lot of genuinely smart people who are otherwise, like, really intelligent subscribe to this. Just like, you know, Tesla was a super genius dude, but he also believed in eugenics. You have people like Mark Twain was an anti-Stratfordian. He could not accept the idea that fucking... Am I thinking of that right? Freud 100% was an anti-Stratfordian. Guess why? Like, there's a list somewhere you can find of people who believe this shit, and it's fucking stupid. But it was originally devised, like, the most like, if you've ever seen the Roland Emmerich movie Anonymous, the most common yarn spin about this is that the Earl of Oxford was the guy who really wrote Shakespeare. And there's this weird, like, Scientology type, like, religion involved called, like, the Science of Humanity or something like that. And it's this weird aristocracy, like, conspiracy that, oh, if only the fucking Earl of Oxford had been accepted, but, you know, the nobility rejected poetry at the time. But, oh, he was really the secret descendant of the fucking Elizabeth, because she secretly had a whole bunch of bastard babies, and then he secretly fucked her, and she secretly had a crazy double incest baby, who would have been Prince Tudor, and continued the Tudor line. And then, yo, if only there had been the Tudors still on the throne, then the Scots wouldn't have gotten on the throne, and we wouldn't have lost power, and all those stupid, like, pores wouldn't have gotten all these rights, and we still would have been, you know, the nobility and in charge, instead of just being, you know, richer than everyone else. And it's legitimately insane bullshit. And you can always kind of tell who is trying to subjugate society based on who's claiming who wrote Shakespeare most recently. Like, back then, it was the aristocracy. It was the autocracy trying to say, no, a noble birth person actually wrote Shakespeare. And now it's the politically correct people saying, no, it was actually a black woman who wrote Shakespeare. And I don't understand why everyone wants to co-opt Shakespeare. For one thing, like, his plays weren't anything special. at the time or now, frankly. It's this weird thing where, like, if something's old, it's considered high art. And it's kind of dumb. Like, I always have this problem with people saying, like, classical music. And it's like, classical music was the pop music of its day. Mozart was the Katy Perry of his time. And Shakespeare was the theatrical equivalent of Call of fucking Duty. It was lowbrow schlock churned out to appeal to the lowest common denominator. The same, like, stage that the actors performed these plays on were also used to have, like, a fucking bear fight, like, 3 dogs, and people would bet money and be entertained watching these animals gore each other to death. Actors would have to shout over an audacious audience who were, like, jeering at them and would throw rotten produce at actors who didn't perform well enough. Like, they performed for the masses, and he wrote his plays to appeal to the masses. Have you read Shakespeare plays lately? They're full of sex jokes and just crude humor. And the only reason, like, there's all this, like, the only reason he wrote so many plays about fucking Henry the fucking 8th, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th was because the King's Men was patroned by the King James at the time. He paid them and went and saw their plays, but he wasn't there every single night, and they still had to perform for the peons, for the plebeians, for the common man. And the common man then, as now, liked really dumb shit. And that's what he wrote. He wrote really dumb shit to get people to come watch it. And, like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, the separation of, like, high art and low art is so fucking stupid. And people think of Shakespeare as high art because he's old, because it's old. And we're told in high school that he's high art. And so, this unprecedented work of genius couldn't possibly have been written by some guy whose family owned a granary. He was probably illiterate also. So let's just say, whoever wrote it, because it's so genius. It couldn't possibly have been written by fucking Billy Shakespeare over here. Suck my fucking dick. God damn it. People are stupid.